A financial earthquake just shook the entire world. Here's a number that sounds fake, but isn't. If you saved $1 million every single day without missing a day, it would still take you nearly 2,000 years to match the wealth that Elon Musk holds right now. You didn't mishear that. Not one lifetime, not 10 lifetimes, 2 millennia. To put this into perspective, if Elon Musk's wealth were converted into $1 bills and stacked end to end, that line of cash would stretch hundreds of thousands of kilometers, long enough to wrap around the Earth multiple times. You could start laying those bills before the Roman Empire existed, and still not finish today. If you spent $1,000 every second, non-stop, day and night, it would take over 22 years just to burn through $1 trillion. And Elon Musk is now moving frighteningly close to that territory. This is not rich. This is a category error. What we are witnessing is not personal success scaled up. It is something fundamentally different, an accumulation of wealth so large that traditional comparisons break down. GDP's national budget's defense spending. Suddenly, these are the benchmarks, not other individuals. And that's where the real story begins. Because the question is no longer, how did one man get so rich? The real question is, what kind of world allows this to happen? And what does it mean for everyone else? This is not about envy. This is not about admiration. This is about understanding a structural shift in the global system. When a single individual can amass wealth comparable to entire nations, something deeper is happening beneath the surface. Markets are no longer just rewarding productivity. They are amplifying leverage ownership and future promises at a scale humanity has never seen before. So before we talk about Tesla, before we talk about SpaceX, before we talk about artificial intelligence courts or capital markets, we need to confront the shock itself, because this moment marks a turning point. The rise of a man whose wealth forces us to ask whether we are still living in an economy designed for people, or one that now operates on a completely different level. Now let's make the shock even clearer by putting time on trial. Because what makes this moment disturbing is not just how much Elon Musk owns, it's how fast he got there. For most of modern history, extreme wealth followed a familiar rhythm. It took John D. Rockefeller decades to dominate oil. It took Andrew Carnegie a lifetime to build steel. In our era, it took Jeff Bezos more than 21 years to push Amazon through bubbles, crashes, and reinventions to reach roughly $234 billion. That was considered extraordinary. And then 2025 happened. In just 12 months, Elon Musk added over $200 billion to his net worth. Not through selling a new product to billions of people. Not through discovering oil, not through conquering a new continent, but through a violent acceleration of valuation. This is the first time in history that speed, not scale, became the defining feature of wealth accumulation. Think about that. For centuries, capital grew by extracting something tangible: land, labor, resources. Even tech fortunes still followed long arcs of growth. What we are witnessing now is different. Wealth is no longer waiting for factories to be built or consumers to arrive. It is being pulled forward from the future. Markets are pricing what might exist 10 or 20 years from now and assigning that value today. That's why traditional comparisons break. You can't compare Elon Musk to other billionaires anymore because they played a different game. They accumulated wealth in time. Musk is accumulating wealth by compressing time itself. And when time collapses like this, consequences follow. Because systems built for gradual change struggle when confronted with exponential jumps. Laws, taxes, social contracts, none of them evolved for a world where a single individual can gain the equivalent of a mid-sized nation's GDP in 1 year. This is why 2025 feels unsettling. It's not just that someone got richer, it's that the rules of how wealth grows appear to have changed. And that leads us directly to the deeper question we can no longer avoid. Is this the triumph of genius, or the unmistakable signature of a system that now rewards leverage far more than labor? That's the question at the heart of this story. The key to understanding this phenomenon lies in where the money actually comes from. Contrary to popular belief, Elon Musk did not become dramatically richer because he suddenly sold hundreds of millions of new products in a single year. His wealth did not explode because consumers worked harder, bought more cars, or suddenly changed their habits overnight. The explosion happened somewhere else. It happened inside the capital markets. More precisely, it happened in the way modern finance assigns value to future expectations. Most of Elon Musk's wealth is not cash. It is not sitting in a vault. It exists as ownership stakes, primarily shares in companies whose value is determined not by what they earn today, but by what investors believe they could dominate tomorrow. This is the crucial shift. When investors bid up the value of companies like Tesla or SpaceX, they are not paying for current profits. They are paying for a story about the future. A future where cars drive themselves, transportation becomes autonomous rockets, become reusable infrastructure, and artificial intelligence reshapes physical reality. In other words, markets are no longer rewarding output. They are rewarding control over future systems. And once a person is perceived as the architect of multiple future-defining systems, capital begins to behave very differently around them. Money flows faster. Valuations expand more aggressively. Risk tolerance increases. Skepticism weakens. This creates a powerful feedback loop. Rising valuations increase perceived inevitability. Perceived inevitability attracts more capital. More capital pushes valuations even higher. At that point, wealth no longer grows linearly. It grows reflexively. This is why traditional economic intuition fails here. You cannot explain this level of wealth by wages productivity or even innovation alone. What you are seeing is the monetization of belief at scale. And when belief becomes the primary asset, those who shape narratives, timelines, and technological direction gain a kind of leverage that previous generations never had access to. This is the engine driving the numbers. And it sets the stage for something even more consequential, because once wealth is created this way, it doesn't just buy luxury, it buys influence. Once wealth reaches this magnitude, it stops behaving like money. It starts behaving like power. At lower levels, wealth buys comfort. At higher levels, it buys freedom. But at this extreme level, wealth buys something far more consequential: the ability to shape reality without asking permission. This is where Elon Musk becomes fundamentally different from every billionaire before him. Governments negotiate budgets. Corporations answer to regulators. Most billionaires still depend on banks' political goodwill or public sentiment. But when a single individual controls capital flows comparable to national economies, the balance quietly shifts. Decisions that once required consensus now require only conviction. launching satellites that redefine global communication, deploying infrastructure that armies and governments depend on, accelerating technologies faster than legislation can react. At this scale, influence no longer moves through lobbying alone. It moves through dependency. When militaries rely on private satellite networks for communication, when governments depend on privately built launch systems, when entire industries reorganize around one company's roadmap, power stops looking political and starts looking structural. This is the uncomfortable truth. Elon Musk does not need to run for office to influence geopolitics. He does not need to pass laws to affect nations. His leverage comes from owning critical systems that modern civilization quietly relies on. And here's the paradox that defines this era. This power was not seized. It was granted by markets, investors, and institutions that rewarded speed, vision, and scale above all else. No coup, no conquest. Just capital flowing toward whoever appeared most capable of controlling the future. Which raises a question we can no longer ignore. If power today belongs not to those elected, but to those who control infrastructure, technology, and narratives, then who is actually steering the direction of the world? That question leads us directly into the next layer of this story, where technology stops being innovation and starts becoming governance by other means. Technology is often presented as neutral, just tools, just progress, just innovation moving faster than politics. But at this level, that story collapses, because when technology becomes indispensable, it stops being optional and starts becoming a form of governance. This is where Elon Musk crosses a critical threshold. When a private satellite network can determine whether communication exists in a war zone, when access to space depends on one launch provider, when transportation, energy, and AI roadmaps are aligned under a single strategic vision, technology no longer follows the world. The world begins to follow technology. And unlike governments, technology does not debate. It deploys. There are no elections for software updates, no parliaments voting on algorithmic priorities, no referendums on which systems become essential and which are left behind. Decisions are embedded in code. Timelines are locked into roadmaps. Outcomes are shaped long before society realizes what changed. This is why power in the modern era looks so unfamiliar. It's not loud. It's not ceremonial. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly through convenience. People adopt what works. Governments rely on what's available. Markets fund what scales fastest. And step-by-step control consolidates not through force, but through irreversibility. Once a system becomes too important to fail, too efficient to replace, and too widespread to unwind, it effectively governs by default. This is the new form of authority. Not laws written on paper, but systems written into reality. And the uncomfortable implication is this. The future is increasingly shaped not by collective choice, but by whoever builds the infrastructure first. Which brings us to the most difficult question of all. What happens when the architect of those systems is no longer just an innovator, but the most powerful individual the economic system has ever produced? At this point, wealth stops being something you own and starts becoming something you can deploy. That is the moment where Elon Musk no longer fits inside the old definition of a billionaire. Because traditional billionaires spend money inside the system. They invest, they donate, they influence. But at this scale, money begins to rewrite the system itself. Think about what happens when capital is no longer constrained by banks, governments, or even public opinion. Projects that would normally take decades of approvals can be accelerated in years or months. Technologies that would be considered too risky suddenly move forward because one person can absorb the cost of failure. This is why Musk's wealth behaves differently. It doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't wait for policy. It doesn't wait for permission. When capital becomes this concentrated, it starts acting like momentum. Once in motion, it pulls talent data suppliers and governments into its orbit. Entire ecosystems reorganize themselves around whoever controls the funding and the roadmap. And here's the critical insight most people miss. This power is not primarily about luxury ego or even ambition. It's about optionality, the ability to choose which futures get attempted and which never leave the drawing board. At this level, wealth is no longer measured by what you can buy. It's measured by which doors only you can open. And once a single individual holds that many exclusive options over the future of transportation, space, energy, and intelligence, the question shifts again. Not is this impressive, but how resilient is a world that depends so heavily on one decision-maker? That question pulls us deeper into the consequences of concentration, because when too much possibility flows through one node, the system itself becomes fragile. By this stage, the issue is no longer money. It is control over direction. When capital, technology, infrastructure, and narrative power converge into one center, society quietly crosses an invisible threshold. Decisions that once required negotiation between governments, institutions, and markets begin to compress into private strategy sessions. This is where the rules change. A government must justify policy to voters. A corporation must answer to shareholders. But a singular concentration of capital answers only to its own internal logic. And that logic is brutally efficient. If a project aligns with the long-term vision, it moves forward at full speed. If it doesn't, it disappears regardless of public demand or social debate. This is why modern power no longer looks like armies or borders. It looks like infrastructure ownership. Who controls launch systems, controls access to orbit. Who controls autonomous platforms, controls mobility. Who controls data pipelines, controls intelligence. And the frightening part is this. None of these require democratic approval once the capital stack is deep enough. At this level, influence does not lobby governments. Governments begin negotiating with influence. The world is not used to this configuration. History has seen empires, monarchs, and tycoons, but never individuals operating at planetary scale through private systems that outpace regulation. That creates a structural lag. Law moves slowly. Ethics debate slowly. Society reacts slowly. But capital at this magnitude moves exponentially. Which leads us to the most uncomfortable realization so far. The question is no longer whether this concentration of power is good or bad. The question is whether existing institutions are even capable of keeping up. Because once systems fall behind power, correction becomes reaction, and reaction always comes too late. The next layer is even more unsettling because it is invisible. Power today is no longer exercised only through money or machines. It flows through attention. Who decides what billions of people see, argue about fear, or believe controls reality before laws or facts ever arrive? This is where narrative power enters the equation. When a single individual owns or heavily influences platforms where public opinion is formed in real time, that person does not need to issue orders. They simply shape the environment in which decisions feel natural. What trends, what disappears, what is amplified, what is buried, what feels urgent, what feels irrelevant. This is not censorship in the traditional sense. It is gravity. Ideas aligned with the center of power rise effortlessly. Ideas that threaten it struggle to escape the pull. History teaches us something uncomfortable. Every era believes it is immune to manipulation until decades later, when textbooks quietly rewrite what actually happened. And the danger is not malicious intent. The danger is unaccountable influence. Because when narrative control combines with technological infrastructure and near limitless capital influence no longer needs to persuade. It simply normalizes. People begin defending outcomes they never consciously chose. Societies drift in directions no one explicitly voted for. Debates happen inside boundaries that were decided long before the debate began. This is why the question is no longer, is this person right or wrong? That question is too small. The real question is, should any single actor, no matter how brilliant, visionary, or well-intentioned, have the ability to shape economics, mobility, communication, and belief systems at the same time? Because once narrative power locks in, reversal is no longer a political act. It becomes a cultural impossibility. There is a final mechanism that completes the structure: time asymmetry. Traditional institutions operate on cycles, elections every few years. Budgets renewed annually, policies debated endlessly. But exponential systems do not wait for cycles. They compound while others deliberate. This is where the gap becomes irreversible. When long-term technological bets are funded without dependency on quarterly survival, they outpace anything constrained by short-term accountability. Vision stretches decades ahead, while regulators argue over definitions written for the previous century. This is why the most powerful asset is no longer money, technology, or platforms alone. It is patience backed by scale. A government cannot afford to fail publicly. A corporation cannot afford to be wrong repeatedly. But a private actor with enough capital can absorb failure after failure, learning faster precisely because mistakes are survivable. That asymmetry creates inevitability. Projects that would be politically impossible become technically inevitable. Ideas that would be rejected by committees simply wait until resistance dissolves. Opposition exhausts itself arguing whether something should exist, while the system quietly makes it unavoidable. At this point, the figure at the center no longer needs consensus, only persistence. And this is what makes Elon Musk fundamentally different from historical tycoons. He is not racing against competitors. He is racing against time itself, betting that systems move slower than exponential compounding. If he wins that race, the world does not choose the future. It arrives. And by the time society realizes it had a choice, the infrastructure of that future is already locked in, not by force, not by decree, but by momentum. Which leads us to the final question. One that cannot be answered with economics or ideology. When power moves faster than consent, does legitimacy still matter? Or does inevitability replace it? At this stage, resistance doesn't disappear, it fractures. Some people respond with admiration, others with fear, most with quiet resignation. Because when power becomes structural rather than visible, opposition loses a clear target. You cannot boycott an infrastructure you depend on. You cannot vote out a system that is not elected. You cannot regulate something that evolves faster than legislation. This is how dominance stabilizes, not through force, but through dependency. Autonomous networks become too efficient to abandon. Communication platforms become too embedded to replace. Technological standards become too widespread to reverse. Even critics participate because opting out means falling behind. And this creates a psychological shift that history has seen before, but never at this scale. People stop asking, should this exist? They start asking, how do I survive inside it? That is the moment when power quietly wins. Not because everyone agrees, but because disagreement becomes impractical. At this point, society no longer negotiates terms. It adapts behavior. Ethical debates turn symbolic. Political outrage becomes cyclical noise. And real decisions migrate upward away from public space and into private architectures. What looks like freedom of choice remains, but only within predefined corridors. And this is the most dangerous illusion of all. When people believe they are choosing while the range of choices has already been decided. The system does not need obedience. It only needs participation. And participation, once normalized, becomes indistinguishable from consent. Which leads us to the final realization before the conclusion. The greatest power is not the ability to command the future. It is the ability to make every alternative feel unrealistic. And this is where the story must end. Not with an answer, but with a pause. Because what we are witnessing is not the rise of a man. It is the exposure of a system. A system capable of concentrating unimaginable wealth, accelerating power beyond public oversight, and transforming private vision into global reality faster than societies can react. Some will call this progress. Some will call it danger. Most will live inside it without ever naming it. The truth is uncomfortable. This future is not arriving because one individual is exceptional. It is arriving because the architecture of the modern world allows and even rewards this outcome. Technology compounds. Capital amplifies. Institutions lag. And in that gap, history is quietly rewritten. The question we are left with is not whether this trajectory is good or bad. That debate is already too late. The real question is simpler and far more unsettling. When power no longer needs permission, what role is left for society itself? Thank you for staying with this journey to the very end. If this analysis challenged the way you see wealth, power, and the future, take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts. Because the future will be shaped whether we discuss it or not. The only choice left is whether we understand it before it arrives.